When people imagine the fall of Rome, they picture barbarians at the gates, legions scattering, or emperors poisoned in palaces. But empires do not fall only to external attacks. They collapse from within. And one of the most destructive forces that has always accelerated that collapse is money. Rome did not fall solely because of invasions or corruption. It fell because its monetary system collapsed. And the lessons to be drawn from that collapse are still relevant today for every modern economy that believes it can manipulate money without consequences. Let's set the scene. For centuries, the backbone of the Roman economy was the silver denarius. First minted around 201 BC, this coin was nearly pure silver and was accepted with confidence across the empire and beyond. Roman soldiers were paid with it. Merchants wanted it. Ordinary people stored their savings in it. The denarius was not just money. It was trust embodied in metal. The power of the empire and the value of its money were intertwined. As long as people trusted Rome, they trusted its currency. But maintaining an empire is expensive. Legions had to be paid, roads and aqueducts built, wars financed. By the 2nd century AD, Rome was overstretched. Borders were being defended against Germanic tribes in the north and the Parthians in the east, while unrest grew within. Tax revenues could no longer keep up with military spending. So emperors turned to an ancient trick: debasement of the currency. Instead of raising taxes, which always provokes backlash, they reduced the silver content of the denarius. The numbers tell the story. Under Augustus, at the dawn of the empire, the denarius was about 95% silver. By the early 3rd century, under Emperor Caracalla, that figure had fallen to around 50%. By the mid-3rd century, under Emperor Gallienus, the denarius contained less than 5% silver. What had once been a solid silver coin was now little more than a bronze disc coated with a thin layer of silver. People could see. A single country. It will ripple globally. And if history is a guide, those who suffer will not be asset holders, but the millions who depend on wages, pensions, and savings held in increasingly fragile currencies. So what should you, as an individual, take from Rome's monetary collapse? First, inflation is not an accident. It is a policy. It is the silent tax that has destroyed empires for 2,000 years. Second, understand that real wealth does not reside in paper or numbers on a screen, but in assets that retain value when money fails: land, skills, productive businesses, resources. Third, never assume stability is permanent. Romans in the 1st century would have laughed at the idea that their money could become worthless. Germans in 1913 would have dismissed the thought of wheelbarrows of cash. Zimbabweans in the 1980s believed independence would bring prosperity. And yet, the same story unfolded every time. Rome's fall reminds us of this: financial systems collapse slowly, then suddenly, when trust evaporates. When money ceases to be real, society begins to unravel. Contracts break down, trade halts, armies disband, and states lose their legitimacy. Barbarians at the gate may deliver the final blow, but the true killer is always inside the treasury. And the core truth is this: history does not repeat exactly, but if you do not understand it, it will crush you anyway. Rome's monetary crisis was not just about bad emperors or greedy elites. It was about how fragile money becomes when concentrated in the hands of power. And that fragility never disappeared. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History has answers. Debt drove the government to the printing press. By 2008, inflation reached an annual rate of 89.7 trillion%. Prices doubled daily. Shops could not update price tags fast enough. Eventually, Zimbabwe abandoned its own currency entirely, and citizens were forced to trade using US dollars or South African rand. Once again, a government believed it could deceive reality. Once again, the public paid the price. But you don't need to look only at extreme cases. Even in advanced modern economies, the Roman model lives on. Consider the United States. In 1971, President Richard Nixon removed the dollar from the gold standard, severing the last link between money and a tangible anchor. From that moment on, the dollar became a fiat currency backed not by gold, but by trust in the state. And just as in Rome, the temptation to spend beyond means became irresistible. Over the following decades, debt ballooned, the money supply expanded, and inflation became a constant background hum. We may not have seen wheelbarrows of cash, but we have watched purchasing power steadily erode. What $1 could buy in 1971 now requires more than $6. The coins look the same. The banknotes look the same. But they have been hollowed out. The trick is always the same. Governments present inflation as growth. They market wage increases as prosperity while costs rise faster. They sell debt-fueled consumption as investment. They point to soaring stock markets as proof of wealth while the majority owns no stocks at all. Like Roman emperors, they act as if nothing has changed, while quietly extracting value from every coin, every bill, every paycheck. What makes this especially dangerous today is scale. Rome's collapse was imperial. Weimar Germany's was national. Zimbabwe's was local. Today, however, the entire world rests on fiat currencies, massive debts, and central banks ready to print trillions at the first sign of crisis. This means the next collapse will not be confined to a Western Roman Empire was already fatally weakened. The debasement of the denarius had hollowed out Rome's economic core. Armies could no longer be sustained, trade networks had collapsed, and trust had vanished. Rome's fall was not a single event but a long process of decay. Monetary collapse was one of its sharpest threads. So what does this mean today? It means this: the destruction of money is always the destruction of empires. Rome believed it could deceive its people with coins that looked the same but contained less real value. Modern states believe they can do the same by printing paper, manipulating interest rates, or inflating away debt. But the outcome is always the same. The public pays the price. Wealth is destroyed. Trust collapses. Rome learned this lesson the hard way. And if we ignore it, we will learn it too. History did not stop teaching lessons after Rome. Every major inflationary crisis since has followed the same pattern. Governments debase money to cover expenses. Elites protect themselves with real assets. Ordinary people grow poorer. Rome's monetary crisis was the first large-scale example of this, a template for collapse. By the 20th century, the echoes were unmistakable. After World War I, Germany faced crushing reparations under the Treaty of Versailles. The government believed it could cover its debts the same way Rome once did. By printing money. In 1923, hyperinflation spiraled out of control. A loaf of bread that cost 1 mark before the war cost over 200 billion marks by the autumn of that year. People carried wages in wheelbarrows. Pensioners starved as their life savings evaporated. And just like in Rome, debtors were freed from obligations while those who owned real assets, land, factories, foreign currency, emerged stronger. Money became meaningless. Economic despair fueled the political extremism that paved the way for Hitler's rise. Zimbabwe followed the same path in the early 2000s. Land seizures, collapsing production, and rising. The difference with their eyes and feel it in their hands. Inflation was inevitable. With money no longer tied to real value, prices soared. What once could be bought with a single denarius suddenly cost dozens. This was not an abstract theory. It devastated the lives of ordinary Romans. Soldiers demanded higher wages to keep up with rising living costs. Merchants refused to accept debased coins, preferring barter or payment in gold. Local economies reverted to direct exchange as trust in money evaporated. As confidence declined, emperors responded by minting even more worthless coins, hoping quantity could replace value. This was the familiar vicious cycle seen throughout history. The crisis peaked during what is known as the crisis of the 3rd century. Between AD 235 and 284, Rome endured roughly 50 years of chaos, invasions, plagues, civil wars, and economic collapse. Emperors rose and fell at dizzying speed. Some ruled only for months before being assassinated. Behind this political drama lay a collapsed financial system. Taxes were demanded in increasingly worthless currency. Farmers abandoned their land to avoid paying. Trade networks disintegrated. The Roman state resorted to desperate measures, from price controls to forced labor, to keep the system alive. None of it worked. One emperor, Diocletian, tried to stop the bleeding. In AD 301, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, setting price ceilings on thousands of goods and services, from grain to wages. Violators faced death. The edict was a complete disaster. When money is broken, prices cannot be controlled by decree. Black markets exploded, and official trade nearly ceased. People quickly learned a simple truth: no law can make bad money good. Eventually, Rome abandoned the denarius entirely. Around AD 312, Constantine the Great introduced the gold solidus, a coin of consistent purity and value. This brought centuries of monetary stability to the Eastern Roman, or Byzantine, Empire. But by then, the